Hey, welcome back to the 260. Today we are bringing you an individual that has impacted the EMS and fire community greatly. We sat down with Mark Litwinko, a career firefighter, an advanced EMT, a SWAT team member, and a fire investigator, and an instructor for TECC and RTF. He has impacted the community greatly by starting Indiana's very first rescue task force protocol back in 2014. Just 6 months after implementing this protocol, it was put to action in a real-world setting. Mark's helped agencies worldwide build an RTF program that actually works. Let's dive in.
We've been married for 21 years.
That's awesome. Congratulations.
We moved out. I grew up in Indiana. I grew up in Fort Wayne, college in Ohio, and then I never came back. And from college, I went out to the East Coast, went to upstate New York. And so that's where I met her. And then just through a whole different life that I had at the time and a totally different career, I ended up getting laid off in communications and everything. I got moved back here for a job. And I was here for about a year. And I joined a volunteer fire department. 2 years later, I applied to Fort Wayne. I was a one-shot wonder, got on in one shot, and never looked back.
Which volunteer department?
I was with the Voight, or West Central. Well,
Okay.
What is West Central? Was
Awesome.
Voight, yeah.
Shout out West Central.
Yeah. So you are our RTF guy. Like everyone knows who, I shouldn't say everyone, anyone in the community knows who Mark Litwinko is. I feel like you're kind of
Might be a good thing, could be a bad thing. I don't know.
Yeah. So how did this get started for you? Kind of give us the history.
So the RTF,
of
yeah.
RTF,
so Rescue Task Force.
Mm-hmm.
So the history kind of started from, so I'd been on the department for, at that point, I think I had been on for maybe 7 to 8 years, maybe 10 years at that point. And just, so I also work as a tactical medic with Fort Police Department's SWAT team or EST team.
Yeah.
And just kind of working with them, going into some higher threat environments, a lot of talk on active shooters, having being aware of the world that we lived in and just kind of reading articles and being aware of things like these events were unfolding across the nation. Departments were kind of figuring out what are we going to do as a fire service community to respond to an active threat. So, everybody always falls back to the active shooter because that's just the easiest. Everybody knows what an active shooter is. If I say it's how we respond to active shooters, but really the Rescue Task Force is an active threat. So anywhere that our traditional medical care protocols, our traditional response just isn't going to fit. So some type of higher threat environment. So civil unrest, car into a crowd of people, somebody actively shooting somebody, stabbing somebody, whatever that is, right? So I just kind of had this idea that, hey, we as a department probably should be a little more prepared than we were. I was out at the academy. I was working out here as the academy instructor for us, and I met with Chief Leahy at the time and kind of pitched him this idea of what was being called the Rescue Task Force, and there was only a handful of departments in the country that were even doing it. Talked to him about it, and he's like, it's a good idea. It's something maybe we should go to. And the fact that it's kind of 50% police and 50% fire department, obviously we had another people to draw into that. And so he set up a meeting with the police chief at the time, and we went over there, we met with the chief of police, we met with the chief of special operations for them and the EST chief at the time, or chief team leader at the time. And I remember Chief Bender, who was in there, I remember him saying, this is probably something we should have done 20 years ago. And it's just, how are fire and police going to work collectively to respond to an active threat? And so that started the ball rolling, and it was okay. Now it's time to do some research and how this is going to come together, and talk to a lot of different departments and met a lot of people and shared policy, and just, we weren't trying to reinvent the wheel, so to say. We were just trying to find what everybody was doing, which was very few people in the nation at that time was doing. And we ended up building a program that worked really well for us and has since worked well for a lot of people around the country. And so I think it was probably 2011 we started that 2012 we kind of started that conversation when I first got out here. 2013 things got put into motion in terms of how we were going to do the training. And I had a group of people I was working with at the time, and kind of focus group, I guess, the steering committee, right? And so talking to them how it's all going to come together, both from an EMS aspect, a fire operations standpoint, and how police are going to get integrated into that. And so pitched a program, finally got the approval on everything. 2013, we started training the fire department and how we're going to respond, and the police department in that. And so we went through and taught what we call RTF operations class, which is a 16-hour training. And that was taught to all two engine company or two rig houses throughout the city. And then we taught a rescue task force awareness. So what the rescue task force was all about, who's involved in it, to everybody in the department. And then we put together a training for police, and then we did some hands-on training collectively with police and fire. And so 2014, after we finished up the training, I believe it was like late 2014, we officially put pen to paper on policy, and we were the first agencies in the state of Indiana to have a integrated response to an active threat as fire and police. As what I would say now in my teaching is as Fort Wayne public safety, right? Is we bridge that gap from this is a police run to this is a fire run to having the understanding like, yeah, we're all going to be there and when this happens, and we all going to know how we're going to function together and what the overall goal is, and that's the life safety, one, eliminating the threat, and then the life safety aspect of it is how can we get in and get our hands on the injured victims at the point of injury? And this idea like, oh, the police can just go in and drag them out to us, that's so archaic and so absent-minded. Or, we'll just wait 2 hours until police have secured the whole building and then we'll go in. Well, from a medical standpoint, we know that doesn't work either when we're talking about trying to stop a preventable death injury, right? And so it was this mesh of things that worked out really well. So we put it into play, and I think we kind of rolled it out late 2014, maybe early 2015, I don't remember thing. And then literally within 4 months of rolling it out, I think 6 months maybe, we had our first active shooter at Ravenscroft Community College where it was put into motion. Just as things go, parts of it worked really well. Some things didn't go that great, or I should say went great, but just maybe some identifier things that we wanted to work on, kind of tweaked that policy a little bit, and it has been used multiple times since then.
So really amazing how you didn't wait until the incident happened to put it in motion. You had it in motion before the incident happened.
Yeah, and so there's a lot of history to it, right? And then taught for IDHS, and we taught all over the state, and now I have my own business that teaches this. But one of the things that we talk about when we teach is too many agencies wait for a tragedy to drive their policy changes, right? And this is one of those things that we don't need to wait for the tragedies happening all around us. So let's change our policy to prepare for that tragedy. And I think that's where some public safety agencies, no matter what, different things like, as we talked off before we started, like, that's not going to happen. What are the odds of it's going to happen here? Like, well, you don't want to wait until it happens to figure out you're not prepared.
Yeah. And what is your company's name?
So the company I started is called Axis Emergency Readiness Solutions, just typically goes by Axis. And that whole thing, I always say, like when I introduce it, it's like it was born out of necessity, really, right? After we put this in the city, obviously, there was a lot of people that heard we were doing this. And so we had fire chiefs from around the state that were calling, asking what kind of programs we were putting in. I went and spoke to South Bend, Mishawaka, Notre Dame, that whole conglomerate up there, kind of gave them some guidance on what we were doing. I had a lot of medical directors that we were talking to. And then obviously Homeland Security gets interested in what you're doing as well. So IDHS, Indiana State Department of Homeland Security, got interested, and they sat through a lot of our program. They actually came up and sat through some of our classes that we were teaching, and they were like, this is really good. We want you to teach. And so they contracted me to be a contract educator for them, and they let me bring on some of the guys that were helping me here. And we taught, they gave us a grant, and we taught all over the state of Indiana. We were teaching Rescue Task Force and TECC, Tactical Emergency Casualty Care, which is a huge part of the whole Rescue Task Force program. That kept going, and then as word spreads, it went beyond state borders. And so some agencies from outside the state of Indiana wanted some training. And so that is where I said that my company was born out of necessity, because and it just so happened to coincide with COVID wrecking everything for everybody. All the funding dries up from the state, but people still wanted this training. And so we were out giving trainings to bordering states, and that grew. And we've been involved with teaching this at FDIC for the last 9 years.
And you're teaching at Worlds
teaching
EMS.
EMS World this year. So, and it's grown from there. We teach Rescue Task Force, we teach TECC, we teach a lot of civilian level stuff in terms of, situational awareness, things like that.
I was just going to say, you were going to be at World, so if people are listening and they want to receive more of this information, it's in Indianapolis this year. And
the TECC classes. Yeah, so we're teaching TECC. We're not doing Rescue Task Force down
Okay, I apologize.
Yeah, we're doing, they asked me to teach the Tactical Emergency Casualty Care class, a full card class down there this year. So a 2-day TECC class. But Rescue Task Force is talked about significantly.
I imagine there's a Venn diagram with
and then, well, it's funny because then the the final scenario of a TECC class is usually an active shooter event that you have to go in and start treating people in. So it falls right into the rescue task force world.
There's some overlap.
Oh yeah, very much so.
Can you tell me like the difference between the TECC and like the technical or technical EMS? Tactical.
Oh yeah.
Sorry, tactical EMS. There we go.
Yeah. So tactical EMS is just a position, really, more than anything, right? It is, you're a medic, but you work in a, I guess tactical is such an odd word. Everybody just assumes it to be military or police oriented when you say that, right? Tactical is just, it's just how we're going to accomplish something. What's our tactic in this? And so tactical EMS is typically those medics that are assigned to a SWAT team or some type of higher threat team that's going to go in, warrant service teams, things like that. But what they operate under, the medical guidelines that they operate under, are the tactical emergency casualty care guidelines. So what those are is a set of medical care protocols, or I don't even call them protocols, they're just guidelines. Basically what it allows us to do is meet our standard of care as providers based on the environment that we are operating in. So it's not telling you like you're going to do a bunch of different things that you don't normally do on the street. It's just like, hey, this isn't the time to do those things because the environment doesn't allow for it. And one of the things I use the most about that is like a cardiac arrest. Like we go into an active threat, there's an ongoing threat, whatever that is, and we come across a victim who doesn't appear to have any traumatic injury, no penetrating injury, no gunshot, whatever that is, but they are pulseless, they're not breathing, they're warm to the touch, right? And in all other world of ours in EMS, we would work this person as a cardiac arrest, right? However, in that tactical environment, in the high threat environment, it is about doing the most good for the most people, especially if you have a significant number of patients. And what TECC allows us to do is like, I need to go past this person because this person is just going to be dead when I finish doing what I'm going to do because we don't have the resources. One, I don't have the time to spend on this person. And all these people that have survivable injuries down here from bleeding from an extremity or junctional injury or something like that, an airway, I can do something for them and potentially save their life. But the more time I spend over here is unlikely to happen, especially if it would be a traumatic arrest. They're dead from the traumatic arrest. They're going to be dead when I finish that traumatic arrest. And now everybody else that I could have saved is also going to be dead. So in a very roundabout way, TECC allows us to meet our standard of care based on the threat environment that we are working in. So it gives you this risk-benefit analysis kind of.
I love it because I like playing psychological games with myself to kind of prepare myself for difficult circumstances. And this reminds me of like, okay, I have a standing order, I have protocols, like I have a way that I like to treat A, B, or C, or whatever you want to call it. But what's the most challenging environment I can do that in? Yeah. What's the most challenging environment? And that changes everything.
And does it make sense to do it in that environment, right? Like I can go in here and we can start a line on this guy and all that, but I'm going to probably leave this person for a period of time while I go treat someone else. So I can't just leave that IV sitting there flowing. So I'm going to end up turning it off or whatever. And so it just doesn't make sense. And even put it even more rudimentary than that. Like this is how I kind of explain some of our classes. Like we all have a bleeding control policy. It doesn't matter what EMS agency you work for. Like we have, apply direct pressure, elevate the extremity, and then put on a tourniquet. Well, TCC is like, hey, which one of those three is the guaranteed going to work? And it's going to take the least amount of time. And
you got to move on.
Right? It is go to what we know is going to work, and you can do it the fastest. Do it quickly, do it effectively, and move on to your next patient. And so like that's what TEC focuses on. And so there's different levels of TECC. There's a TECC class like what we're teaching at EMS Worlds. It is ALS in nature because we talk about IV, we talk about advanced airway stuff, we talk about some of those things that are more of that paramedic level skill set. But what we teach is very basic TECC. It's just BLS TEC. You focus on like stop the bleeding, keep them breathing, prevent them from freezing, and get them out the door. And when we start kind of coining this, like being brilliant at the basics is what is going to save these people's lives. We're not taking in narcotics, we're not taking in our monitors, we're not taking in airway, we're not taking in that. Like if you guys have seen our RTF bags, it's just tourniquets, wound packing gauze, emergency trauma dressings, a litter, and maybe a couple of NPAs, which probably doesn't even have a purpose in there. And you're doing the most you can with this small amount of equipment in as quick amount of time as you can. So plugging a hole, stopping that bleeding, positioning them so that they can keep breathing, and then ultimately is stabilizing the environment. Or if you can't stabilize the environment, they got to go. You got to get them out as quickly as you can.
You're bang for your buck procedures and skill sets.
Yep, absolutely.
So in thinking about agencies that want to implement something like this or that should, how would you convince them that, hey, we need to start thinking about this now? Like, I know we kind of see school shootings all the time.
Yeah, I tell them watch the news.
Yeah, I was gonna say watch the news.
Right?
What about the people that
so
don't
we're very
watch
fortunate
the news?
in Allen County. Allen County Public Safety, which Fort Wayne's included in that, obviously, is we're very fortunate. We've all taken the steps necessary to prepare for that. Like all the county fire departments, all the county fire department districts have a rescue task force program. The city of Fort Wayne has a rescue task force program. The sheriff's department, our local ISP guys, all the local law enforcement agencies around here have been trained to respond in that capacity or fill that rescue task force assignment if they are given that. Outside of here, it's not always that way, right? And northern Indiana's pretty good. Indiana, for the most part, is pretty decent, but I still get calls from fire departments that are like, hey, we're interested in doing this rescue task force thing. And my first question is your police department on board? Is the police chief on board with doing this? Well, not really. And I've had it the other way too, where a police department has called, hey, we want you to come up here and teach this fire department this rescue task force thing because we're wanting to do this integration. And it's like, well, are they on board? Do they want to do it? No, they don't want to go into this environment. So what I find is it's really just it's a misunderstanding of what the goal of that rescue task force is, right? And so one, you got to have the relationship first. You got to have the relationship with law enforcement and your local law enforcement, your local fire departments. You've got to have that relationship and understanding that we're going to work at this collectively as whatever public safety, the city of anywhere, Indiana public safety, right? So you got to come together as one public safety entity, not fire and police and EMS all working separately, because it's about integrating our resources together to respond to this collectively. What I try to explain to them is, one, I'm not trying to change anyone's tactics. I'm not trying to tell PD they got to do something different. And I'm not trying to tell fire and EMS they got to do something different. What we're trying to teach you is you do what you do good. You do as an officer what you do good. You do as a firefighter medic what you do good, but do it together. So you lead them in there, you get them there safely. Once you get there safely, now it's the firefighter medic show, and you get these people treated as quickly as possible, and you get on to the next victim, the next driving force. And if there are no more, then we get these people out as quickly as we can. So it's about a lot of it's about relationship, is just building that communication between the two agencies and having an understanding what the roles are between there. And so, yeah, and then of course, if you have you still get the people like, we're still not ready to, I don't want to go into an active shooter thing, and I don't want to do this. And it's just, they just don't understand their role, right? And I use this a bit when I teach, is like, as firefighters, we will go into a structure fire at like 2:00 in the morning and not know much about the inside of that building. We don't know how it started. We don't know if there's a threat in there that's going to get us, but man, we got a smile on our face and we're going in. And why do we do that? It's because we are confident in our training and our tactics and our equipment, and it's an environment that we have been trained to work in. Well, the active threat is a new environment that we are being required to work in. And I think just through training and tactics and equipment, of having an understanding how to work in that environment with the right training, with the right tactics, and with the right equipment, it's just another thing that we as firefighter and medics and police officers are just going to be required to do. And again, I kind of jokingly said, if for agencies that, we're not ready to make it, watch the news. And as I said, don't wait for tragedy to come to you before you change that policy or integrate a policy. Put something in motion before that tragedy comes there, because we don't want to be these agencies that you see on the media that, I used Uvalde as an example, just because it's fresh in people's minds, right? They had the right training, they had the right capabilities, they just didn't do it. And they didn't put it in motion. And what they're finding there is there are administrative level people, operational level people that are being sued civilly for their inaction of what they did there. And I don't want us as an agency or our people to ever be involved in that. I want to, if something worst case scenario ever happened here, that they look at Fort Wayne and say, or Allen County and say, man, they were prepared for it and they did it right? And I always tell people, like, so now you're ready, right? You're ready for the next action. You were never ready for that. There's no readiness that's ever going to get, but we are certainly more prepared today for an active threat to respond to than we were, 10 years ago.
Less reactionary.
Yeah,
you have a plan.
Yeah, it's a plan. We have, and it's not just a theory, right? It's been practiced. It's not like we wrote down, here's our plan on paper, but we're never going to practice it, because something on paper that's never been practiced is just totally a theory that it's going to work. And until you put it in motion, you're never going to know if it's going to work or not. So we've practiced this. We've trained with law enforcement. And we talked a little bit offline there about the, training we did a couple of Decembers ago with the law enforcement, with Fort Wayne Police Department. And we had some ISP guys over there, and we were working together and doing this. And so, yeah, the communications there. You hear people's names and you hear people's voices on the radios, and now you're working with them and you're seeing them. And so you've built this relationship up just between crews and law enforcement and firefighters. And so all of that has a tremendous impact on how we respond to these things.
I'm hearing a lot of law enforcement, a lot of fire department. What if this community you're teaching it in has a private EMS circumstance? Like, where do they fit into this?
Kind of like Fort Wayne a little bit, right? With TRA for the most part. What's the most important thing that EMS brings to any of these instances? Transport, right? They have a role, and it's the transport role. They have a very critical role in all of this. And if we just specifically talk about City Fort Wayne and TRA and how it all works, they're probably going to be tasked with the cold zone triage area, right? Our goal as the fire department and police is to get in there, get these people stabilized and get them out as quickly as we can. Well, once we bring them out, we don't have 50 ambulances that are just going to have this ambulance transfer point and they're just going to be stacked up and we're just going to keep throwing people in the back and they're just going to drive away. Like, I don't know how many ambulances we're going to have there at any time. The system's going to dictate a lot of that. But the reality is we probably aren't going to have enough. And so we're going to have some type of area set up somewhere, maybe a ways away from the scene, maybe right next to the scene, depending on the exact threat that we're responding to. And so we're going to have some type of triage area up there. And to me, that's where that local, maybe not-for-profit ambulance agency or whatever that agency is that's the EMS specific, that's going to be their bread and butter. That's going to be their role. They're going to be running that triage zone. They're going to be handling that transport, because it doesn't do much good for a couple of paramedics to show up in an ambulance and then go inside on a rescue task force team, because now they just left one of the biggest asset they brought is that transport ambulance, and here we can't drive that, right? And so now that rig is just sitting there, kind of wasted resource until it can be backfilled with more medics from that agency. So let's put them to work. Also, when you look at TACC, the one thing that gets talked about is, and some paramedics don't like to hear this and some doctors don't like to hear this, but the closer you are to the active threat, or I'm kind of said it backwards, the higher level of care set that you have, a doctor, a paramedic, the farther away you should be from that active threat. What we're doing inside is 100% BLS in nature.
I think that makes
sense. There's no ALS skills involved in that. So yeah, we're fortunate enough here as a department that we have paramedics and advanced medics and stuff. So we're going to integrate some of that in there. But you guys aren't going to be working to your paramedic skill set, and because they're not taking any of that equipment. And so your paramedics, where are they going to do their magic, right? The paramagic's going to happen in that cold zone triage where they have all that equipment and they can open up the paramedic toolbox, so to say, and they got the airway and the monitors and the drugs and all the advanced medical care. And then ultimately, we don't want them sitting here either. We want to get them to the trauma triage or to a trauma destination as quickly as we can, because if we can't get them there alive, there's nothing the trauma doc's going to do for them. And so if you can think about this graduated scale of, you have the higher level of medical care at the trauma facility, to the paramedics running the triage area and transport, to the BLS medics for the most part, or at least medics just doing BLS care within the active threat zone. And so I think that's that role that paramedic level or that EMS agency falls into.
I'm so happy here. This is great. I'm trying to think too. Like, I think I love it in a podcast when, like, I don't know, I'm learning too, and this is great. So I'm trying to think, like, all right, if I was me, like, all right, I'd be in that truck, maybe setting up some TXA, getting blood ready, maybe some calcium, blankets, cranking the heat.
All the stuff that you would never do in that active threat.
Yeah,
right?
Things that wouldn't be appropriate. Like
it wouldn't be appropriate. It's not time appropriate. It's not patient appropriate, because all that takes time. Like, I just did when we talked here, just the trauma symposium that we had just here last week, and I said, ALS medicine is fantastic. ALS medicine takes time. And what we don't have in these active threats is time.
Yeah.
Because people bleed out as quickly as 3 to 5 minutes on a lower, 7 to 10 minutes on an upper extremity, right? So think about that for a second, right? This event has to take place. The event has to take place. The person's got to be injured, gunshot, stab wound, whatever. It's got to cause that life-threatening bleed to a lower extremity or to somewhere, right? Somebody's got to call 911. Call taker's got to get that information. We got to get dispatched. We got to get there. We got to get our equipment. We got to get our team. And we got to get in there. We are already going to be behind the 8 ball in that life-saving capacity just by the nature of how we operate, unless we just happen to be right there when it happens. So the more time we take per patient, the less likely the patient at the end of the line is going to survive. And so that's why it's just keeping to the basics, being brilliant at the basics and being the right care at the right time, and treat as many people as you can in the quickest amount of time that you can.
Changing your mindset too, because you're going from I'm treating a patient to I'm managing a scene, right? You know, I got to do the most good with what little time I have.
And it's funny, you said the mindset too, and the management, because we talk about TECC and tactical EMS and stuff like that, and it's all about tactical EMS, being focused on the basics and managing your patients correctly in the environment that you're in. You also have to be able to transition back to traditional medicine too. I just wrote an article for Firehouse magazine on this, and it's the transition from tactical to traditional, because we talk a lot about transitioning from, I can't do traditional in medicine, I got to jump in and be tactical in my care. Well, at some point, that transition has got to come back. And now you've got these people out of this high threat zone. And now we have to be able to transition from tactical to traditional, where, ALS care really kicks in. And everything you just said, that you're setting up in the back of the bus waiting for this patient to come in. Now we got to have understanding is, how do we transition back to traditional medicine, to traditional pre-hospital medicine, to ultimately get them to that trauma destination.
Have you gotten feedback from departments that you have delivered this training to, where they're like you just said, we had, Ravenscroft, hey, we had this circumstance happen, and, we had this training, and this is how it went. Have you had any
I've gotten
feedback
some
like
of that. I don't go into too much with what they did or anything like that, but, what I've gotten back from them is like, we're glad you come in and do this training. And what I get more out of that is, like, since you've been in here and you did this training, here's what we've added, and here's the next step we took. And I always told people, like, I never created this class or even my business to go teach this. I never thought it would be like, hey, I'm teaching at the ABC Fire Department, and I'm going to come back like every year and reteach it. Like, that wasn't the goal of it. It's always been presented as a train the trainer level course. Like, I just taught you the basics of what we know and what works really well. I don't expect you to not do anything else with it. I want you to grow your program and expand it. And, and so I talk to people like, hey, when we did that first training, it was, what you guys did was great, but now we've instituted like simulated gunshots and loud music and fire alarms and all this. And like, that's exactly what you need to do. But then that translates into the field. Like, I've had guys like, hey, that TECC class you talked to us about, and, I know that it wasn't meant for traditional, like, our everyday trauma runs, but I made this car accident and I had like an up and under injury under a gas pedal, and it almost ripped their ankle off. And the tourniquet was the only thing that we could do that was quick, efficient, and needed to be done.
Yeah.
We worked into that TECC mindset real quick. And I'm like, that's exactly what that's about, right? And doing the right care at the right time.
So this can apply
For sure.
more broad.
No.
Yeah.
And all of our trauma physicians that are in the city now, they strongly support TECC. I know Dr. Capito that was here taught Trauma Symposium. I know him really well. He's one of our docs on our EST team as well. And so is Stanek, who was here. They are 100% behind the TECC. Dr. Capito's gone and come down and taught at FDIC with me a couple of times. And it's pretty awesome when you can bring in a trauma doc to teach at one of your classes. And so they are 100% behind that, just that. The philosophy of TECC and what the goal is trying to accomplish. Because like I said, we're not deviating from any traditional pre-medicine. We're just having an understanding of when we need to put it in practice.
What would you say to someone listening who is maybe hearing you and is identifying a gap in their personal repertoire or their departments, and how could they incorporate this or obtain this training?
Like from a rescue standpoint perspective, or TECC, any of them, either way. So the cool thing is like, I'm not the only show in town teaching it, right? And regardless of what other agencies teach this, we're all teaching the same framework. What I find is, so LSU has a big program that teaches this. Alert out of TEEX out of Texas, they also have a big program. Like, those are the people I'm up teaching against, right? And massive budgets and unlimited manpower, right? So depending on what side of the house their instructors are from, sometimes it's delivered a little bit more on the law enforcement side of things, and then sometimes it's delivered more on the just fire department medic focused side of things. And that's where I kind of hope, where my guys and we kind of bridge that gap of, we like to go right down the middle. And I have an understanding that we both sides of this, right, has a role in this. So where can you get the training? Obviously, you can reach out to me. I can get you hooked up. If you look on ACADIS, there's the PER 350 and 300 classes. I think they're through LSU and TEEX. They're offered through ACADIS in the city. Goshen does a lot of them. I think South Bend does some of them as well. And then ultimately, just it's nothing cutting edge. It's not anything crazy. And if you just think about what we're trying to accomplish, I use this as an example, right? So you guys familiar with the RIT team concept, right? So group of firefighters at a structure fire that get assigned the RIC assignment. So what is that? It's a, specialized, not a specialized group, a group of firefighters that kind of set aside with specialized equipment. And they wait for a very specialized call, lost, downed, or trapped firefighter. And they don't get involved in really any other assignment on the fire ground until that one happens. And when they are called to go in, they go into that high threat environment at probably one of the worst possible times. When they do enter that environment, they're going to last known location of that victim, right? Once they get to our firefighter that we're looking for, they identify them, they triage them, they treat them, and they get them out the door as fast as possible. Because why sit in here and mess with them in this environment? Stabilize them to the point we can get them out. So if we just simply look at what an RTF team is, it's a group of firefighters that sit around, with a specialized set of equipment and wait until there's a very specific reason that they're sent into this high threat environment. That reason is a known victim. So there's our driving force. And once we know there's victims in there, we go to the best known location of them. Once we get to them, we triage them, we treat them, and we get them out as quickly as we can. So this is like not some groundbreaking thing, the rescue task force, like it's Rick and Rit has been involved in fire service for a long time. It's just we're putting it in with maybe a little bit of different equipment because we are donning ballistic vests on the fire department side. And maybe we're going into a different environment and we're possibly going in and looking for a different type of victim, right? But the mindset is the same. The framework that we do it is the same. It's just we're doing it with law enforcement and we're doing it in an active threat environment instead of a fire. And we're going in after civilians who are injured, maybe even police officers who are injured, instead of a lost, downed, or trapped firefighter. But once we get there, what's our goal? Triage them, treat them, and get them out as quickly as we can. That's the whole thing of it. So yeah, people, these training courses are out there. I encourage people to look on ACADIS, reach out to me. The TECC level of training, if you're looking for something like that, we teach that quite a bit. There's a lot of agencies that do teach that as well. So they're out there. They're not overly hard to find. No.
What is the future for the active threats?
They're only going to get worse, right? Look at society, right?
Yeah.
Nobody has compassion very much anymore, and it's all just kind of, I don't know, maybe I have a little twisted mindset or jagged mindset on that, but I just think I think if you sit back and you think that nothing like this is ever going to come to your community, or we don't have to do anything, we don't have to prepare for an active threat or an active shooter because it's not going to happen here, right? I think that just sets you personally up for failure. I think that sets your agency up for failure. And so I think the potential for threat is ever increasing. They have no boundaries. It doesn't matter how influential your neighborhood is, how big your population is, or how small your population is. We've seen these things happen across the globe. Vegas, Orlando, we hear all these big ones because maybe the number of victims, the venue that it was chosen, or typically like what kind of weapon was being used, right? But there's so many that never make the national media because maybe there was only one or two victims and they used a handgun instead of a scary rifle, and it just never made national media, but it affected that community significantly, right? And so I think the probability and the possibility of things happening are higher probably now than they've ever been. I think it's always the right mindset to be prepared for that. And what do we as public safety have to lose in prepping for something that may never happen, right? That's like the whole goal of Rescue Task Force is you invest your time and your energy and your money, unfortunately, into putting this program in place and doing the training and supplying your guys with your firefighters with the right equipment for something you hope never, ever happens. Like it's almost a necessary evil. It's that you got to be prepared for. There's a lot of things we do in public safety that we prepare for, and maybe, have you guys ever done an emergency crike?
Not yet.
In the
Almost
field?
had to.
Have you trained for it?
Yeah.
Low probability, high risk factor, high stress factor, but yet that doesn't mean we don't practice it. It's standard curriculum for paramedic class to be taught something like that. So responding to an active threat should look no different than stuff like that. Why not prepare for it? Because being prepared for something is so much better than not having any idea how to overcome it.
Yeah, and especially with those situations, because you're mass casualty, right? high stress. It's not what we're used to. Multiple agencies, stuff like that. That's the reason why it's so good to practice with
And
each other.
I used to use the term mass casualty a lot in our trainings. I've kind of dumped that a bit because what I found is going out and teaching, like for some people, like 2 patients is a mass casualty for some agencies, and 20 is a mass casualty for others, right? And there's all kinds of agencies, because what defines the mass casualty typically? It's your ability to transport patients or your manpower you have available on the scene. Like how many patients can we treat at one time? That's the definition of a mass casualty pretty much. And for some agencies, 10 patients is no big deal. Like I got 15 ambulances here, well, 10 patients. In other agencies, it's 2 patients is a lot because I got 2 medics and one's critical and one patient's critical and the other one's critical. And that's a lot of work for 2 people. And so that may be a mass casualty for them. So I've even kind of ditched that term in my trainings because I'm not going to be able to tell you in your home agency what a mass casualty is for you. I mean, we can define it. It goes beyond our ability of what resources we have. But
you just use like triage scenario, I guess, or
triage. I mean, we go back to the beginning. Transport's going to build it. Are you going to have to? Do you even have to set a triage area up? Like I got some contacts out in Texas, and they're a pretty big agency, and they're like, yeah, we hardly even do triage anymore, because we just have so many ambulances that are available that show up. It's ambulance transfer points, they call them ATPs. Like we have an ATP on the northwest corner of the building. The victim comes out and literally goes right into the back of an ambulance and they're gone.
That's sharp.
Yeah.
Like they have the resources that they don't have to worry about setting up this cold zone triage area. And so when they're like, we just don't even need to teach triage anymore. And I'm like, whoa, like I don't have that ability. Like our agency, we are going to have to set up triage. Like we don't have 50 ambulances that are just sitting out back waiting for us to pick up victims. Yeah. And so there are certainly agencies that have to do that and set that up. I was actually just had a conference call with some AEMT people last night talking about triage systems and then the new curriculum and how to address it and things like that. And I have a whole different, like the triage we're doing inside is totally different than the triage we're doing in the cold zone area. So. Do they have a pulse? Are they breathing? Mm-hmm. What can I do with them with the limited amount of equipment I have with me?
Yeah.
It's progressive, right? It's something new for fire departments to do. And not put blinders on thinking that we're like any community is untouchable by an act of violence, an active threat of violence happening there. I mean, what just happened was at Vancouver, they just had a car go into a crowd of people that killed 11 people.
Yeah.
Did that community think that was going to happen? Look at anything, Boston Marathon. Like how many Boston Marathons happened? And all of a sudden, there's a terrorist attack at the finish line, right? Like those people didn't go in there that day thinking it was going to happen to them, and probably never thought of it. But I know I kind of a little morbidly sit back sometimes and think, man, we're pretty lucky that not more has happened. Like I'm always amazed that those kinds of events haven't picked up in frequency, I guess. But I would just go into it and just be as prepared as you can, right? We're never ready for things. I wouldn't say like, yeah, we're ready for tomorrow's high-rise fire, or ready for the next fatal fire. Like we're prepared. We'll know what to do. We've practiced it. We've trained. We have policy in place, and beyond policy, we've trained on our policy. Like it's not just a theory. It's we've put things in motion and we've tested it and we've done some testing and know that nothing's ever going to be perfect, right? We just, as much as we can prepare for anything, especially in the public safety world. Like, EMS is one of those great things. Like we typically do things in a sterile environment and great lighting. And, I'm working on an IV with perfect light and a calm patient or a no patient, just an arm, right? Or you learned your emergency crike in a perfectly lit environment and no one's screaming at you. And then the next thing you know, you're in an alley and it's raining and it's 2:00 in the morning and
not on the side of the road.
Yeah,
and car flipped over.
Or you get a mountain now, you're in the back of the ambulance and it's 8,000 degrees because it's Indiana. It's 50 yesterday and it's 80 today, kind of thing, right? And you're sweating all over the place, and you want to keep the ambulance warm. And it's like, we didn't keep the classroom warm when we were doing this, and now this ambulance is 80 degrees because we have to keep it up that high for our trauma patients. It's like, just we prepare as best we can, and I think that's the goal, is to not rule anything out. No one's immune from anything like this happening, meaning no community is immune from an active threat, and just having an understanding that when the time happens, what's the old saying? You don't get to choose the time chooses you. Yeah. And so I hope you're ready when it does.
And Mark, I want to thank you for having you on. I'm going to link in the show notes your business and how to get a hold of you and stuff, for anyone out there that just wants to get a hold of Mark, get some extra training. And just remember, these threats, they're not going away. And I mean, that's sad. That's a sad reality of today. And it's good just to be prepared and hope you never have to use it. And just remember, everyone, leave it better than you found it.